There are some mornings that look so ordinary that you would never imagine they are about to divide a person's life into two completely different worlds. On August 13, 1986, 32-year-old Michael Morton woke up in Williamson County, Texas, expecting nothing more than another workday. His 26-year-old wife, Christine, was asleep. Their 3-year-old son, Eric, was in his bedroom. The house was quiet. The neighborhood was quiet. Michael had a job, a home, a wife he loved, and a little boy who was still young enough to need his parents for everything. Before leaving for work, Michael kissed Christine and checked on Eric. Then he wrote Christine a short, loving note and left it on the kitchen counter beside her car keys. At approximately 5:30 in the morning, Michael walked out of the house. He believed he was leaving his family behind for an ordinary day. He did not know that he would never see his wife alive again. And he certainly did not know that before the truth finally emerged, he would spend the next 25 years of his life behind prison walls. By the time that truth came, Michael Morton would have lost 9,129 days, 9,129 mornings, 9,129 nights, 9,129 days in which his son would grow from a 3-year-old child into a grown man. And the most disturbing part of the story is this: the evidence that could have helped prove Michael was innocent was there almost from the beginning. By noon on August 13th, something was terribly wrong inside the Morton home. A neighbor noticed 3-year-old Eric wandering outside alone. At first, the sight was strange. Then it became frightening. A child that young should not have been outside by himself. The neighbor approached Eric and guided him back toward the house. She called for Christine. There was no answer. The house was silent. But it was not the peaceful silence of an ordinary home. It was the kind of silence that makes a person instinctively slow down. The neighbor moved through the house and eventually reached the master bedroom. Christine Morton was lying on the bed. She had been brutally beaten to death. Blood covered parts of the room. The violence of the attack was unmistakable. And somewhere inside that same house was a 3-year-old boy who had just lost his mother. Within hours, the quiet suburban neighborhood had become a crime scene. Police arrived. The property was secured. Investigators began documenting the house and searching for evidence. News of the murder spread through Williamson County, and pressure quickly began building for answers. Who had entered the home? Who had killed Christine? And why? Then Michael Morton was told. He was at work when the news reached him. His wife had been murdered. His son was alive, but something terrible had happened inside their home. Michael rushed back. He expected to find investigators trying to understand what had happened to Christine. Instead, he found himself becoming the person they wanted to understand. The husband, the grieving husband, the obvious suspect. Investigators began looking at Michael almost immediately. The simplest explanation seemed to be that the husband had killed his wife. But there was a problem. The evidence did not fit neatly into that theory. Michael had left the house early that morning and gone to work. His whereabouts were supported by witnesses and records. And then there was something else. Something that should have changed the entire investigation. 3-year-old Eric had been taken into the care of his grandmother, Rita Kirkpatrick. The little boy had experienced something no child should ever have to experience. He was too young to understand murder investigations or criminal trials, but he could still describe pieces of what he had seen. Eric talked about a strange man. He repeatedly said that his father had not been home. His words were simple: "Daddy wasn't home." That statement should have forced investigators to look harder for another suspect. There were other clues as well. Neighbors had reported seeing a suspicious green van near the Morton home around the time of the murder. There was an unknown man. There were indications that someone other than Michael might have been connected to the crime. But an unknown intruder created uncertainty. Michael created a convenient suspect. And once investigators began believing that Michael was responsible, the investigation increasingly moved toward proving that belief rather than testing whether it was actually true. That decision would change everything, because the most important evidence in the case was not simply missed. According to the case materials, critical information was withheld from Michael's defense. The report concerning Eric's statement existed. The information about the suspicious vehicle existed. Other information that could have pointed investigators toward another person existed. The evidence was there. Michael simply did not know it was there. And that meant the courtroom was about to hear a version of the murder that was missing some of the most important pieces. The real killer was still outside, and Michael Morton was about to be placed on trial for a murder he had not committed. In February 1987, Michael Morton stood inside the Williamson County Courthouse accused of murdering his wife. He was 32 years old. He had no criminal history. He had a stable job. He knew he was innocent. And like many people who enter a courtroom believing the truth will protect them, Michael believed that once the jury heard the facts, everything would become clear. He believed the justice system would eventually see what he knew to be true. He had been at work. There was no obvious physical evidence tying him to the killing. There was evidence supporting his timeline, and there was information suggesting that someone else may have entered the home. But the jury did not have the complete picture. The prosecution needed a motive. There was no obvious motive that made sense, so a deeply personal theory was presented. According to the prosecution's account, Michael had wanted sexual intimacy with Christine the night before her death. Christine had been tired and gone to sleep. The prosecution suggested that Michael became angry over the rejection and later killed her. Even the loving note Michael had left beside Christine's keys was presented as something that could have been designed to make him appear innocent. It was a simple story: a husband, a wife, anger, murder, and a loving note that, according to the prosecution, could have been part of a calculated deception. The problem was that the defense did not have all of the evidence that could have challenged that story. Michael's lawyers argued that he had been at work. They presented information supporting his whereabouts. They argued that an unknown intruder could have entered the home. But the defense was fighting with one hand tied behind its back. The information about Eric's statement was not before them. The information about the green van was not before them. Information concerning Christine's stolen credit card being used after her death was not before them. The defense had requested disclosure of evidence. The court sought assurances that the prosecution had complied. According to the materials provided, Prosecutor Ken Anderson did not provide the complete picture. Critical reports were removed from the file before it was reviewed. The significance of that cannot be overstated. Imagine being a juror asked to decide whether a man is guilty of murdering his wife. Now imagine that evidence exists suggesting another person may have been involved. Imagine that a 3-year-old child has said his father was not home. Imagine that there is information about a suspicious vehicle. Imagine that a stolen credit card connected to the victim was used after the murder. And now imagine that none of that reaches the jury. The jury sees only the story constructed around Michael. They do not see the missing pieces. They cannot question evidence they have never been shown. They cannot weigh information they have never heard. And Michael cannot defend himself against evidence that has been kept from him. The prosecution was able to present a case in which Michael appeared to be the most plausible suspect. The hidden evidence that could have created reasonable doubt remained outside the courtroom. After less than 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty. Michael stood at the defense table as the verdict was read. The man who had entered the courthouse believing that the truth would set him free was now being sentenced to life in prison. He was 32 years old. His son was 3. Christine was dead. And Michael was being sent away for a crime he had not committed. The courtroom doors closed. Then the prison gates closed. But Michael did not yet know the most devastating part. He did not know that the real killer had not been found. He did not know that evidence capable of changing the direction of the case was sitting inside old files. And he did not know that he was about to begin a sentence that would last 9,129 days. The Wynn unit in Huntsville, Texas, became Michael Morton's world. He entered prison as a 32-year-old husband and father. He would eventually leave as a 57-year-old man. Between those two moments were 9,129 days. It is difficult to understand that number until you turn it into something human. 9,129 mornings without freedom. 9,129 nights behind locked doors. Thousands of meals eaten under prison rules. Thousands of days watching the seasons change from behind walls. Years passing while the world outside continued moving forward. Michael had been sentenced to life. But the punishment did not stop at the prison gates. His parents grew older. Friends changed. Technology changed. America changed. His son changed. Michael remained inside. And perhaps the deepest wound was Eric. The little boy who had been 3 years old when his mother was murdered grew up carrying a terrible belief about his father. Eric had witnessed the aftermath of the murder. He had tried to describe what he remembered. He had said his father was not home. But the justice system had not followed the meaning of those words. Instead, Eric grew up believing that Michael was responsible for his mother's death. Michael continued trying to reach him. He wrote letters. He waited. He hoped. But when Eric was 13, he wrote to Michael and asked him to stop contacting him. For Michael, that letter was another sentence. The prison had already taken away his freedom. Now he was losing his son. Michael could have continued writing. He could have demanded that Eric listen. Instead, he chose to respect his son's wishes. He stopped. For years, father and son lived separate lives. One inside prison, one outside, neither fully understanding how much truth had been hidden from them. But Michael did not surrender. He worked. He maintained discipline. He kept records. He continued trying to find legal help. He wrote to courts and organizations. He appealed. He waited. Again and again, doors closed. Then, after years of silence, people began looking at the case differently. Attorney John Raley became involved. Nina Morrison and the Innocence Project also became part of the effort to re-examine the conviction. And a question that had been waiting for years suddenly became important. What evidence had been collected in 1986? What had been tested? And what had never been tested? The answer led investigators and lawyers back to a forgotten piece of evidence. A bloody blue bandana. The bandana had been recovered near the Morton home after the murder and turned over to investigators. For years, it had remained evidence. But modern forensic science had changed. DNA testing could now reveal information that investigators in 1986 could not have obtained. In 2005, 19 years into Michael's imprisonment, his legal team sought permission to test the evidence. The logic was simple. If Michael's DNA was there, it mattered. If another person's DNA was there, it mattered even more. If the evidence could answer a question that had remained unanswered for 19 years, it needed to be tested. But the state resisted. The evidence had been sitting there. Michael had spent 19 years in prison. Yet the legal battle over whether the evidence could even reach a laboratory continued. 6 more years passed. 6 years. While Michael remained behind bars, lawyers fought over whether a piece of cloth should be scientifically examined. By now, the young man who had entered prison in 1987 was approaching 60. His hair had changed. His body had changed. His son had grown up. But Michael kept waiting. Then in 2011, the breakthrough finally came. After 25 years in prison, Michael Morton was 57 years old. He had spent 9,129 days behind bars. Then the evidence was finally released for independent testing. Inside a laboratory, technicians examined the blue bandana. For decades, the cloth had been connected to a murder that had destroyed a family and imprisoned an innocent man. Now modern science had an opportunity to answer a question the justice system had failed to answer. Was Michael Morton the killer? Or was there someone else? The testing produced a result that changed everything. Biological material from an unidentified male was found on the bandana. It did not match Michael Morton. The unidentified profile was entered into the National DNA database. Then came the match. The DNA belonged to Mark Allen Norwood. For Michael, the result was more than a laboratory finding. It was scientific confirmation of something he had been saying for 25 years. He had not killed Christine. There had been another man, and now investigators had a name. But the discovery created an even more disturbing question. If Mark Allen Norwood's DNA was connected to Christine Morton's murder, what else had he done? Investigators began examining another unsolved murder. In 1988, a young mother named Deborah Baker had been murdered in her home in Austin. The similarities were disturbing. Another woman, another home, another brutal attack, another family left behind. When evidence from that case was examined, Norwood's DNA was also found there. Suddenly, the Morton case was no longer only about an innocent man who had been imprisoned. It was about what could happen when the wrong man was convicted while the real suspect remained free. Michael Morton had spent years behind bars. The real killer had remained outside, and another family had suffered. The implications were devastating. For years, Michael had been treated as the answer to Christine's murder. Now the evidence was pointing towards someone else. The question was no longer simply, was Michael Morton innocent? The DNA had answered that. The question became, how did an innocent man end up in prison when evidence pointing away from him existed from the beginning? And the answer was buried in the original files. Michael's legal team did not stop when the DNA evidence proved that he was not the killer. They wanted to understand how the conviction had happened. They wanted the complete investigative record. They wanted to know what investigators had known in 1986 and what the defense had been allowed to see in 1987. When the original files were examined, the discoveries were devastating. The reports existed. The information from 3-year-old Eric existed. The report concerning the suspicious green van existed. The information about Christine's stolen credit card existed. The evidence had been generated during the original investigation, but Michael's defense had not received it. The significance of those documents was enormous. The little boy had said his father was not home. The investigation had information pointing toward another person. There was evidence that could have raised questions about the prosecution's theory. Yet the case proceeded as though Michael was the only plausible suspect. For 25 years, Michael had lived with the consequences. Now the evidence was finally being examined in court. On October 4, 2011, Michael returned to the courtroom. But this time he was not there as a convicted murderer. He was there as a man whose conviction was collapsing. His hair had turned white. His body carried the marks of decades in prison. But he had survived. And sitting somewhere nearby was his son, Eric. The 3-year-old boy was now a grown man. For years, Eric had believed his father was responsible for his mother's death. Now he was learning something that should have been known from the beginning. His father had been telling the truth. The evidence had been there. The truth had been hidden. Michael looked toward his son. 25 years of silence stood between them. Then something changed. They saw each other. They cried, and father and son embraced. It was more than a reunion. It was the recovery of a relationship that should never have been taken from them. Michael could not get back Eric's childhood. He could not bring Christine back. He could not recover the 25 years that had disappeared. But his son was standing there. And for the first time in decades, Eric knew who his father really was. Michael's conviction was overturned. The scientific evidence had demonstrated that he was not the killer. The hidden documents revealed that the original prosecution had failed to provide critical information. But the story did not end when Michael walked out of prison, because another question remained. Who would be held accountable? Ken Anderson, the prosecutor who had handled Michael's original case, had gone on to become a judge. The man who had once stood in court arguing for Michael's conviction had continued his career inside the legal system. Now his own actions were being examined. A rare court of inquiry investigated what had happened during the original prosecution. The issue was not whether Michael had been innocent. The DNA had already answered that. The issue was how evidence that could have helped prove his innocence had been handled. Anderson faced questions about the missing reports. He faced questions about Eric's statement. He faced questions about information that had been removed from the file. For a quarter century, Michael had been forced to answer for a murder he did not commit. Now someone else was being asked to answer for the conduct that helped put him there. The consequences were historic. According to the source material, Anderson was held in contempt, resigned his judicial position, surrendered his law license, and faced punishment connected to the misconduct. The reversal was extraordinary. The prosecutor who had once helped secure Michael's conviction was now facing consequences over the way that conviction had been obtained. But there was still unfinished business. The DNA evidence had pointed toward Mark Allen Norwood. He was eventually prosecuted for the murders of Christine Morton and Deborah Baker. The cases that had remained unresolved for years finally moved toward trial. Norwood was convicted in the separate cases and sentenced to life in prison. The real killer was finally behind bars. But think about the timing. Michael Morton had spent 25 years in prison. The real killer had spent those years outside. 2 families had suffered. 2 women had lost their lives. Children had grown up without their mothers. And 1 innocent man had watched his own son grow up from behind a prison wall. That is why a wrongful conviction is never just about one prisoner. The damage spreads. It reaches children, parents, spouses, victims, entire families, entire communities. And sometimes, as the Morton case demonstrates, it can allow the real danger to remain outside while the wrong person pays the price. On March 27, 2012, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals formally cleared Michael Morton. The conviction was gone. The label of murderer was gone. The prison sentence was gone. But time does not reverse itself. Michael walked free at 57. He had entered prison at 32. 25 years had disappeared. There was no legal order capable of returning those years. No payment could restore every morning he missed with his son. No courtroom victory could recreate the life that had existed before August 13, 1986. No one could bring Christine back. Freedom was only the beginning. Michael now had to learn how to live in a world that had changed while he was gone. Technology had changed. Society had changed. His son had become an adult. The little boy Michael had once watched sleeping in his bedroom was now a grown man with a life of his own. But something had survived. Their relationship. They began rebuilding it slowly, carefully, without pretending that 25 years had never happened. Michael eventually became a grandfather. The relationship with Eric grew. The silence that had once separated father and son was gradually replaced by conversation, family, and a future that still had room for both of them. But Michael did not stop with rebuilding his own life. He turned his attention toward the system that had failed him. His case became a catalyst for legal reform in Texas. The Michael Morton Act was enacted in 2013, changing discovery practices and strengthening requirements concerning evidence that prosecutors provide to defense attorneys. His story was therefore no longer only about Michael. It was about what happens when investigators become convinced they have found the right suspect and stop asking whether they might be wrong. It was about what happens when a theory becomes more important than the evidence. It was about what happens when information capable of changing a verdict is hidden from the people who need to see it. And it was about what happens when a courtroom is asked to make a decision about a person's entire life without being given the complete picture. Michael Morton spent 9,129 days in prison. But 9,129 is not just a number. It is every birthday that passed behind bars, every Christmas without his son, every ordinary morning when other fathers could drive to work, come home, sit at the dinner table, and watch their children grow. It is the years that disappeared while the truth remained locked inside files. Michael went into prison as a young husband and father. He walked out as a 57-year-old grandfather. The system took 25 years from him, but it could not take his name forever. It could not permanently erase his relationship with his son, and it could not keep the truth buried indefinitely. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive quickly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes decades. Sometimes it survives inside an old police report. Sometimes it survives inside an evidence bag. Sometimes it survives on a forgotten piece of cloth. And sometimes it waits for technology to catch up with a question that should have been asked years earlier. For Michael Morton, that question was eventually answered by DNA. A piece of evidence that had been sitting for years helped reopen a case that many people might have preferred to leave in the past. A hidden report revealed what a little boy had said. A second murder connected the suspected killer to another family tragedy. And a courtroom was finally forced to confront evidence that had once been kept outside the defense's reach. The truth had not suddenly appeared in 2011. It had been waiting inside reports, waiting inside evidence, waiting for someone to look again, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And when that question was finally asked, an entire conviction began to collapse. Perhaps the most haunting part of Michael Morton's story is not simply that an innocent man spent 25 years in prison. It is that evidence capable of helping him was there almost from the beginning. The 3-year-old child had spoken. There had been information about an unknown man. There had been information about a suspicious vehicle. There had been other evidence that could have changed the direction of the investigation. Yet the case continued down one path. Michael was convicted. The real killer remained free. And a little boy grew up believing his father was responsible for his mother's death. For 25 years, Michael kept saying the same thing. He was innocent. The world around him had changed. His youth disappeared. His son grew up. His parents aged. His marriage was gone. But he never surrendered the one thing that could not be taken from him by a prison sentence: his belief that he was telling the truth. Eventually, science gave that belief a voice. The DNA did not care about the theory that had been built around Michael. It did not care about the original verdict. It did not care how many years had passed. It simply revealed what was there. And what was there pointed away from Michael and toward another man. That is why the number 9,129 matters. It is a measure of time. But it is also a measure of what can happen when a justice system stops asking whether it might be wrong. 9,129 days is a long time to wait for the truth. It is longer than a child's entire journey from toddlerhood to adulthood. It is longer than many careers. Longer than many marriages. Long enough for a young man's hair to turn white. Long enough for a son to become a stranger. Long enough for the world outside to become almost unrecognizable. Michael Morton lost 9,129 days. He lost his wife. He lost his freedom. He lost his son's childhood. He lost a quarter-century of ordinary life. But he did not lose the truth. And perhaps that is the final lesson of his story. A conviction is not always the same thing as guilt. A prison sentence is not proof that the right person has been punished. And evidence, no matter how deeply it is buried, can sometimes survive long enough to speak. Michael Morton walked into prison as a 32-year-old husband and father. 25 years later, he walked out as a 57-year-old grandfather. The years were gone. They could not be returned. But his name was no longer buried beneath a conviction. His son knew the truth. The real killer was finally behind bars. And the system that had once failed him was forced to confront what had happened. Sometimes justice arrives quickly. Sometimes it arrives after years. And sometimes it arrives so late that it cannot repair the life that was destroyed. But when it finally arrives, it can reveal everything that went wrong. Michael Morton lost 9,129 days. He lost a quarter century of freedom. He lost moments that could never be recreated. But he never lost the truth. And somewhere in the history of American justice, one number should never be forgotten. 9,129. That is how long Michael Morton waited for the truth to set him free.